Hi there, it's Paulie here. Yay! So, haha. I started gaming back in the 70s, and what got me into it and what actually changed my entire life was The Purple Primer. It was a book by Phil Barker, who was one of the founders of the British Wargames Research Group. And they essentially did Ancients Rules, and the Ancients Rules done by WRG remained the industrial standard for decades. These guys from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, everyone played WRG games. They had the Society of Ancients kind of off to the side there, which was a sort of a magazine that would come out called Slingshot, where people would discuss cool stuff that had been found. It was full of archaeological news. But for a young kid, Phil's book was amazing, because I was like 12 and I found this thing, and it was a primer for ancient war games. But you open this and it's full of cultures that I hadn't really heard of. I'd been to like Istanbul and so on as a kid and so on, so yes, I knew kind of sort of Byzantines. But here's this book that's got the different kind of Byzantine dynasties and Sassanid Persians and all of the successor kingdoms to Alexander the Great's empire and these sorts of things. I was like, whoa, I've been lied to. The world's way more interesting than I was told. So I kind of plunged into a scholarly life, ran off, learned about all this stuff, played games, and yahoo, that was my life sorted. This book has actually been preserved. There's a project out to preserve the great classics of gaming, and it's been reprinted. And here it is, alas not purple. It's Phil Barker's Introduction to Ancient Wargaming, and it's bound with the WRG 6th edition rules, which is why I love this. So what we've got is this fantastic, the first chunk of it is this fantastic book that was an introduction to ancient wargaming. And it was for a kid, it was amazing. It kind of introduced you to the concept of playing games with miniatures, how these games are played, what goes into them. And it gave a primer on what the different kind of troop types were and how they were organized. And right down to really cool advice on like how to make your armies, like, yes, you can just, here's how you paint, here's how you do this. You've got to paint your miniatures, because if you don't take the time and trouble to paint them, well, they're not going to take the time and trouble to get good dice rolls for you on the table. I love it. Kind of interesting little bits of old war games culture. People would make extravagant general figures for themselves. So say one guy, like, he's got a Byzantine general, but he's kind of put bits that he scavenged off Polish Hussar models and so on, and he's modelled extra bits. So his guy's got like a tiger skin blanket over the horse, and he's got like peacock feathers in the hair, and he's got like a couple of secretaries following after him, taking down notes for his wonderful memoirs, because everything he does is so amazing. So yeah, it was full of this lovely kind of funny games culture, very simple illustrations all through it, which were what they ran off at the time, and samples of kind of the WRG rules. There's some great stuff too, like pictures of things from the old Airfix sets. They're 1/76 scale plastic miniatures that had come out, and how you could use those to do it. So again, as a kid, I could get into playing this, and it was only costing me $5 or $10 because I'd go and buy Airfix, ancient Gauls or Airfix Romans. And showed you how to sort of scratch build out of other things. So wonderful resource, fantastic. WRG 6th edition. I love these rules. These things were the final set of rules that were done old style. 7th edition came out, and they had a wonderful idea that we're going to change things so that we're now not using kind of individual figures so much. We have a base which represents troops that have a certain sort of effect. So this is a base of a few hundred light infantry, or this is a base of kind of cataphracts, but they've got some archers in them, or it was kind of, so a base is a effect. 6th edition was the last hurrah of the old style, where we were worried about the equipment individual guys kind of had. So these rules, you have individual figures. These figures are set up so that you have a set of points that you purchase them with, and with that you purchase what their armor is, what their morale is, and what weapons they have. We're very interested in this set of rules as to whether we've got like a long spear and a javelin, or if we're not just spearsmen. No, do we chuck these things? Do we hit with these things? Whatever. So old school miniatures rules were very, very obsessed with scale. They were very obsessed with the ground scale and with the troop scale. A miniature had to represent a certain number of actual people. So there'd be a 1 to 10 figure scale or a 1 to 20 figure scale. I forget what we were in this. But so as a result, you got rules which were they're very interested in that figure scale. They're very interested in the minuate of equipment and so on. A little bit less in kind of airy characteristics like inherent tactics within the troops. So historical tropes like peltastoi, who were like an ancient Greek style of infantry that would form in loose formation, could kind of scatter out into a very open formation to chase after light infantry skirmishers that were bugging your troops, but could kind of pack together and fall on the flanks and actually fight in hand-to-hand combat and so on. These are kind of represented by having a more open ground scale, because the idea is, if we've got Roman legionaries that are a set frontage, well, these guys will have a more open frontage, so we're not getting as many of these guys fighting face to face as against the close order troops, because we've based them on broader bases. And so now it sounds odd, but it actually, you can see what they're thinking. But the thing is, it worked, and it worked for decades. It gave both a good game and a good simulation. Is just the style now to have gone for what we call element-based games, where we don't have individual figures and so on. We have a base which has got half a dozen figures on it that represent a bunch of guys who are armed and equipped in a certain style. And sometimes it gets quite airy-fairy. These are Blade! Do we care what their armour is or anything? Oh, no. It's just the fact that they're Blade guys. They come kind of, their idea is close in with the Blade, so they just have an effect. So it's like, yeah, but what's the difference between my Roman legionaries with their great helmets and their body armour and their shields and their short swords and their pilum that they throw into contact? What's the difference between that and, say, a bunch of Chinese halberdiers who are essentially unarmoured and have like a long dagger axe on a pole? Nothing. They're both Blade. Oh, this one's superior Blade. It gets a bonus, maybe, but not necessarily. So, it's more airy-fairy. So, I can see in some ways the best would be more of a happy medium, which people are reaching for. But these rules were playable, and 6th edition is the pinnacle of that particular style of, I'm going to just call it old school tabletop miniatures. You can see fairly thin. They're not a huge set of rules. They don't waste much time on verbiage. They lay down the scales. They lay down the different kind of weapon classes, long spears and pikes, heavy throwing weapons, which, pilums and Francisca axes and so on. Other infantry weapons and circumstances, which is the good old swords and whatever. Two-handed cutting weapons, and this one brought in pole weapons. There had initially been sort of like light or medium troops, which had no, rawhide or lesser sort of armour. They were very obsessed with rawhide. Heavy, which was like some metal body armour. Extra heavy, which is body armour, but you might have sort of extra armour for the arms and greaves and this sort of thing. And kind of super heavy, which is completely covered. So cataphract cavalry, where all you can see is the eyes. But this one also decided to extend its range from ancient period up to medieval, so it goes up to 1485. So they brought in kind of knightly medieval stuff. So it does go up to plate armour. So they have these as super heavy knight, extra heavy knight, these kind of things. All right, so they brought in extra factors, not wildly necessary, but what the hell. So it's got a point system. You have a budget. You'd have like 2,000 points, and you have to buy an army. You pay for units. Regulars cost you more to buy because regulars manoeuvred a bit better. When you actually played, you formed these units. You have to pay. Gives you like pay 10 points, I think, for a regular unit, 25 for a irregular unit. So you tend to have units of irregulars tend to be bigger because they cost sort of more to make. Yeah, so we've got all these different troop types and things. Now, how it does combat is it's a kind of double charted, and that is what slowed it down, and that is why we moved to these games which just everything runs off the dice. Essentially, these different weapons have factors against different types of armour and troops. what you then do is you look at that factor, you add in a random element, which was done by Dice Roll, and I loved it. They had like irregular troops use a normal dice, regular troops use a what they call an average dice. An average dice goes 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5. So the 1s are removed and essentially turned into a 3, and the 6s are removed and turned into a 4. So they give you a more average result. You get bonuses if the guys are like fanatics or really, really high morale. But then you cross-index it on a chart, number of figures you've got in the melee, and it tells you how much damage you do. So you do have to look up your factor, and then you have to look up the damage. So there's 2 chart things, which is, you know, not the fashion today. Everyone went for stuff where you get a result right off of just compare dice, who gets the bigger. But again, this survived for decades. It's not that slow. You also get some hilarious results as you actually see the real damage that you do. You would get these prizes at conventions for who did the most ridiculously brutal things. The rules are very, very complete. They've got campaign guidelines in them. They've got rules for sieges. They've got rules for naval activities in the sieges and everything. What I really like in this book is appendix at the back, which has all of the airfix boxes from the 70s. The March of Airfix got what was there. It's got fantasy adaptations in there. So it's got stuff for doing Lord of the Ringsy stuff and Conan's Hyperborea and these sorts of things, how to adapt different fantasy ideas into the troop types you see and everything. Look, I've actually replayed WRG 6th recently. I had forgotten how much goddamn fun they were. They actually are fun. They play well. They've got a sort of a verve to them. It's a sweet game. It's not a big battle system. I mean, they look great on the table and you have fun with it, but we're not going to be doing, you know, Cannae or anything involving really huge armies here, because we've only got a limited number of units on the table. We haven't got like this grand sweep of 20, 30, 40,000 troops. But the game they give is really good. Yeah, like I'm glad the rules are preserved, and I actually think they should kind of be trotted out at clubs every now and then, so people kind of remember that old school, and that future designers can pick out the good from it and put it into their designs. It's all very well to copy the last thing that came out and put some polish on it, but this came from essentially a bunch of military historians and archaeologists who wanted a good set of games rules that simulated what they were discovering about ancient troops, and it does a really good job at that. So look, it's not really a living game anymore. It has dropped entirely out of fashion, but I think it's really worthwhile, you know, having a copy for old time's sake, but not a bad thing. I reckon you could have a good time bringing some of this out as a cool retro gaming experience at a convention. More should be done on that line. But anyway, it is an absolute joy to see the introduction to Ancient Wargaming back again, because it meant so much to so many of us back in the day. And really nice to see that 6th edition back. You know, it was a good set of rules. The last hurrah of the ground scale, figure scale, double charted rules style. And like things like piston-engined aircraft reach their pinnacle just as jets come in. Like the battleship really comes to its top just as your aircraft carriers completely put out. This is it. This is the pinnacle evolution of a thing that was then out-evolved by another style. But that doesn't mean it's not damn good fun. Break them out of storage and give it a try again. Cheers.